I used to think love announced itself loudly, sparks, signs, some kind of certainty. But looking back, it started in the quietest place possible, a laundromat on a slow Tuesday morning, where the hum of machines did most of the talking for us. I was there because my apartment dryer had given up again. She was there because, well, I never asked why. She always came with a canvas tote bag, the kind that looked like it had been repaired a few times, but carefully. She folded her clothes like she folded her sentences, neat, patient, never in a rush. The first time she spoke to me, it wasn't even a full sentence. "You dropped this," she said, handing me a lone sock I didn't realize I'd lost. Her fingers brushed mine lightly, and she gave this small, almost apologetic smile, like she didn't want the moment to be bigger than it was. It still lodged itself somewhere in me. After that, Tuesdays became a kind of routine. I pretended it was about the broken dryer, but I stopped calling the landlord about it. I liked the rhythm of seeing her there, mid-40s, hair usually tied loosely, a few strands slipping free like they had their own plan. We talked sometimes. Not much. She'd comment on the weather, or the price of detergent, or the fact that the ceiling light near machine 9 flickered every few minutes. I'd answer, trying not to sound too eager. But the thing that caught me wasn't the conversation. It was the pauses. The way she looked at the machines instead of me when something she said edged a little too close to personal. The way her thumbs circled the rim of her coffee cup when she was thinking. And the way she remembered small things. My name. My usual detergent. That I liked my clothes dried a little underdone so they still felt warm when I folded them. One morning, she sat beside me while my clothes tumbled behind the glass. "You're early today," she said. "Couldn't sleep," I replied. She nodded like she knew that feeling well. I wanted to ask her why she looked tired too, but the question sat in my throat and never made the jump. Instead, I folded a napkin I'd been fiddling with into smaller and smaller squares until it couldn't fold anymore. She watched me quietly, a faint smile tugging at her mouth, as if she was trying not to say something. "You always do that," she murmured. "Do what?" "That napkin thing." I shrugged. "Keeps my hands busy." She hummed softly, eyes dropping to my fingers before she looked away again. That tiny hum stayed with me longer than it should have. There were moments, brief, almost imaginary, when I thought she looked at me just a second too long. Like when she handed me a cup of coffee she, accidentally, bought extra. Or when she laughed at something I said and then looked down, pressing her lips together, as if the laugh surprised her. But nothing about it felt dramatic. It felt lived in. Like something we both stepped into without meaning to. That day, the day, didn't start with anything unusual. I threw my clothes in the machine, sat down, pretended I wasn't waiting for her. The door chimed softly, and she walked in, brushing rain from her sleeves. She looked at me, just one glance, and something in it made my chest tighten, though I couldn't explain why. We talked less than usual. She seemed distracted, folding and unfolding the strap of her bag. I thought she might be upset, but I didn't ask. I kept my eyes on my phone, rereading an unsent text I'd typed weeks ago. "Do you want to get coffee sometime? With me?" I never sent it. I didn't delete it either. When I finished packing my laundry, she stood near the exit, hesitating like she wanted to say something. She opened her mouth, closed it, then finally whispered, "Take care today, okay?" It shouldn't have felt like anything. But it did. Later that evening, as I set my warm clothes on my bed, my phone buzzed, her name lighting up the screen. A single message. One that changed everything. Her message wasn't dramatic. Just 8 words. "Were you free this evening? I need a hand." I stared at it for a long minute, wondering why she'd chosen me out of all the people in her life, if she even had many. She didn't talk about friends. She didn't talk about family either. Sometimes I wondered if Tuesdays at the laundromat were the only conversations she had that week, and the thought made my chest feel uncomfortably warm. I typed "sure, where?" and deleted it twice before sending it. She replied with her address. When I reached her small apartment, she opened the door with that same cautious smile she always gave, like she was offering something fragile. The place smelled faintly of lavender and old books. A stack of unopened mail sat on the counter, and I pretended not to notice. "Sorry for calling you out like this," she said, tucking a loose strand of hair behind her ear. "The shelf in the living room, it keeps tilting. I thought you could help." "It's no problem," I replied, though my voice was a little too soft. Her eyes flicked up at the tone, then away again. The shelf wasn't the real reason. Anyone could have fixed it. She just needed company, someone to talk to without explaining why she needed to. As I tightened the screws, she stood nearby, holding a cup of tea she forgot to sip. I kept my focus on the shelf, but I was hyper-aware of her, how close she stood, the quiet way she breathed, the way her fingers rested against the warm porcelain. "You said you couldn't sleep," she murmured suddenly. "Has it been like that for a while?" I hesitated, screwdriver paused mid-turn. "It comes and goes." She nodded slowly. "Mine too." She didn't elaborate, and I didn't push. Her honesty hung between us like something delicate and easily dropped. When I finished, she handed me the tea she'd barely touched. "Here. Before it gets completely cold." I took it, letting my fingers graze hers longer than necessary. She didn't pull away immediately. Her breath hitched, barely audible, but I felt it. We sat on opposite ends of her couch, the tea warming my palms, silence stretching comfortably for once. She lifted her feet slightly so they wouldn't touch mine, but the movement felt careful, not dismissive. "You know," she said quietly, "you remind me a little of someone I used to know. When I was younger. He always listened more than he spoke." I smiled faintly. "Did you like him?" Her eyes stayed on the window. "Too much." Something tightened in the room, not tension, exactly. More like recognition. A silent admission that neither of us named. I caught myself imagining how her hand might feel if she placed it on my knee. I immediately shut the thought down, heat creeping up my neck. She sighed softly. "I'm glad you came." Those 4 words did something to me. Not loud. Not dramatic. Just enough to make me feel seen in a way I hadn't in a long time. When I stood to leave, she walked me to the door. I reached for the handle at the same moment she reached to lock it behind me later, and our hands brushed again, light, accidental, but not meaningless. She looked up, eyes lingering a second longer than they should have. I don't know why that moment stayed with me. I'd think later. Maybe because it felt like someone finally saw me. For a week after fixing her shelf, something between us shifted, just slightly, like a picture frame tilting on the wall. Still recognizable, but no longer the same. She didn't come to the laundromat the next Tuesday. I pretended it didn't bother me. Pretended I wasn't checking the door every few minutes. Pretended I didn't replay the moment her fingers brushed mine. I told myself maybe she was busy. Maybe she didn't need clean clothes. But the truth was simpler. I missed her. On Thursday afternoon, I ran into her at the small grocery store near my place. She was holding a bunch of oranges she hadn't decided on yet, turning them over like she needed something to focus on. When she saw me, her expression tightened, just a flicker, almost invisible, but I caught it. A kind of hesitation. A pulling back. "Oh," she breathed. "Hi." "Hey," I said, suddenly aware of how out of place I felt next to her. I shoved my hands into my pockets. "Didn't see you this Tuesday." She looked at the oranges again. "I wasn't feeling up to it." I nodded, even though it pressed strangely against my chest. "Everything okay?" A tiny shrug. "Just tired." I wanted to reach out. Ask more? But her body leaned away, not much, maybe an inch, and it told me what her words didn't. She was retreating. Or trying to. Before I could respond, someone called her name from behind us. A woman around her age, holding a shopping basket. "There you are," the woman said. "I thought you already left." She glanced at me briefly, curious, assessing. Then back at her. I was just picking out fruit, she said quickly. Too quickly. The friend smiled at me politely before nudging her. We should go before the line gets long. Something in the way she said we made my skin prickle, though I didn't know why. I stepped back to give them room. I'll see you around. She opened her mouth like she wanted to say something else, something more, but the friend was already pulling her away. Yeah, she whispered. See you. The next few days felt strange. She hadn't done anything wrong, but the distance, her distance, echoed in places I didn't expect. I found myself drafting a message I never sent. If I crossed the line, tell me. But I didn't send that either. The following Tuesday, she was back. Sitting in the corner, hands wrapped around the thermos, eyes distant until she noticed me walking in. Her posture softened, barely. Enough. I'm sorry about the other day, she said as I sat beside her. Her voice was quieter. I didn't mean to be off. It's okay, I replied. You don't know me anything. That's not it. Her fingers tightened around the thermos. Sometimes I don't know what I'm doing. Her honesty startled me. Or maybe the vulnerability in it did. I nodded. Yeah. I get that. The machines hummed. A sock tumbled against the glass. She looked at me, really looked, and something unspoken hovered between us. Can I ask you something? She murmured. Sure. She hesitated, eyes on my mouth before shifting to my collar, then the floor. Why do you always show up on Tuesdays? Even when your dryer works? My breath caught. I like the company, I said. Her lips parted, like she felt the weight of those 4 words more than she expected to. For a second, she leaned in. Or maybe I did. Maybe it was both of us. The space between us thinned, warm, fragile, inevitable, until she drew in a sharp breath and pulled back, fingers gripping her thermos too tightly. We shouldn't, she whispered. But her voice trembled. And that said everything. The following week felt different before it even began, like the air between us had learned a new shape. She didn't avoid me, but she didn't settle easily either. Every glance felt like she was weighing something she didn't want to name. We walked home together that evening, not planned, not talked about. The sun was low, everything washed in a soft orange that made the street look strangely gentle. She carried her canvas tote over her shoulder, and I kept my hands tucked in my jacket pockets so I wouldn't be tempted to do something stupid. Like reach for her. At one point she slowed her steps, eyes fixed on the sidewalk. You were quiet today, she said. So were you. She exhaled, almost a laugh. Seems we're both good at that. We reached a small neighborhood park with 2 benches facing a fountain that barely worked anymore. She stopped there, set her bag down, and sat. It felt like she needed the sitting more than the resting. I joined her, careful to leave just enough space so she didn't feel crowded. But not enough for her to think I wanted distance. She traced a finger along the benches peeling paint. My friend asked me who you were, she said softly. At the store. I tensed before I could help it. And what did you say? I didn't know what to say, she admitted, tilting her head back slightly. I don't know what you are to me. The words hit harder than they should have. Not because they were cold, because they weren't. I don't know what I am either, I said. To you. She gave a small, pained smile. You're young, she whispered. And I'm not. That's not the problem. Isn't it? Her voice was barely there, but the fear in it was loud enough. I looked at her profile, the tired eyes, the mouth fighting itself, the way she kept her hands still so they wouldn't shake. You think that's the only thing that matters? I asked. No. Her fingers twitched. That's the problem. A cold knot formed in my stomach. Are you pulling away? She didn't answer right away. Instead, she folded her hands into the sleeves of her sweater, like she was trying to hide them, or steady them. I get attached, she said finally. Too easily. And I can't afford that anymore. My throat tightened. Are you saying I'm a mistake? Her eyes flicked to mine, startled. No. You're. She stopped, words catching on something more tender than she meant to reveal. You're the first person in a long time who makes me feel. Another stop. Another breath. Makes me forget how alone I am. A confession disguised as an apology. Or maybe the other way around. I leaned forward slightly, unable to pretend I wasn't drawn to her. I think about you, I said quietly. More than I should. Her breath trembled. The fountain behind us sputtered once, then went quiet again. The silence stretched, charged, like the moment right before rain. She looked at me, slowly, deliberately, letting herself hold the gaze this time. It felt like she was letting me see all the things she'd been trying to hide, want, fear, longing she didn't approve of. Her hand shifted, just barely, brushing against mine on the bench. She didn't move it away. Tell me, she whispered, voice fragile. What happens if we don't stop? The question hung between us, dangerous, honest, trembling. A question I didn't know how to answer. A question that could undo everything. The day after she asked that question, what happens if we don't stop, I expected something to change. Not dramatically. Not overnight. Just something. But Tuesday came, and she wasn't at the laundromat. At first, I thought maybe she was running late. I loaded my clothes, sat on the same plastic chair we always shared, and tried not to stare at the door every time it opened. 30 minutes passed. Then 40. I texted her halfway through the drying cycle. You okay? I didn't hit send. The message stayed on my screen, blinking like it knew I wouldn't. By the time I walked home, I'd convinced myself she just needed space. That maybe I'd read too much into her leaning in. Into the quiet confession she never fully said. Into the warmth of her hand brushing mine on that bench. But the next day she still didn't reach out. And the day after. On Thursday evening, I passed by her building on my way to the store. It wasn't intentional. Or maybe it was. The lights in her apartment were on, faint and golden. I stopped across the street, feeling ridiculous, but unable to move. That's when I saw him. A man, older, maybe early 50s, knocking on her door. He carried himself like someone familiar with the place. When she opened the door, she didn't smile. She didn't look happy to see him. If anything, she looked tired. They spoke quietly in the doorway. I couldn't hear the words, just the tone. Heavy. Old. Worn down. Then he stepped inside. She closed the door behind them. I stood there a moment too long before walking away, hands shoved deep in my pockets, heart thudding in that dull, confused way that didn't feel like heartbreak. Just interruption. A sentence cut off mid-word. Later, I found myself sitting on the edge of my bed, staring at my phone again. I typed a different message this time. Did I do something wrong? Backspace. Backspace. Gone. Friday morning, another surprise. She texted? Sorry I haven't been around. Been dealing with some old things. Old things. The man, maybe? A past life I didn't know she still carried. Do you want to talk? I typed. I didn't send that either. We didn't see each other for 6 days. 6. I kept replaying the way she looked at me on the bench, open, scared, wanting. I kept replaying the moment her fingers had lingered near mine. And then I pictured the man at her door, the way she looked past him like she was bracing herself. Hope, confusion, withdrawal, every one of them took turns until I couldn't tell which one was winning. On the 7th day, I went back to the laundromat. Not because I needed to, my dryer had been fixed for weeks. I just needed the place where we hadn't been pretending. Her seat was empty. A half-folded napkin sat on the table where I always fidgeted with mine. Someone must have left it behind, but it felt like some part of us was still sitting there, waiting. I didn't feel heartbroken. I'd think later. I felt paused. Like life forgot to finish the sentence. I stayed until the machine stopped spinning. Then I walked out without knocking on her door, without sending the message, without taking the seat beside her that wasn't mine anymore. It was almost a week before she finally reached out again. A short message. If you're free, could you stop by? Just for a moment. No explanation. No warmth. Just a careful sentence, pressed flat so it wouldn't reveal more than she wanted. I walked to her building slower than I meant to, every step carrying a question I wasn't ready to ask out loud. When she opened the door, she looked different, not dramatically, just worn. Like she hadn't slept well. Like something inside her had been rearranged. "Hi," she said, voice small. "Hi." She stepped back to let me in. The apartment felt quieter than usual. No kettle on, no soft music, no half-folded laundry on the couch. Just her, standing near the kitchen counter, fingers tapping lightly against her arm like she was trying to keep herself steady. "I'm sorry about disappearing," she said. "I wasn't trying to push you away. I just had some things show up from my past." The man. I didn't say it, but I felt it. "You don't have to explain," I murmured. "I think I do." She swallowed. "That man you saw, he's my ex-husband. He shows up whenever his life falls apart. And I let him talk because it's easier than arguing." Her breath caught. "But I don't want him in my life. Not like that. Not anymore." I didn't move closer, but something in me softened. "Okay." She looked at me then, really looked, which felt like standing too close to a fire you weren't sure would warm you or burn you. "I avoided you," she continued, "because I didn't trust myself. I didn't want to drag you into something messy. You're young. You still get to choose clean beginnings." I shook my head. "I don't want a clean beginning." The words surprised both of us. She stared at me like she needed to check if I meant it. I did. I stepped closer slowly, giving her time to pull back. She didn't. "I kept thinking," I said quietly, "about that night on the bench. About what we didn't say." Her breath trembled barely. "I thought about it too. And?" She closed her eyes for a short moment, like the truth hurt more than silence. When she opened them, they were honest in a way that felt almost too intimate to hold. "I wanted to reach for you," she said. "I just didn't know if it was allowed." A small, raw confession. Soft enough to break something open. "If you had," I whispered, "I wouldn't have stopped you." She laughed, one short, weak breath that wasn't really laughter. More like relief leaking out after days of tightness. She took one small step toward me. Then another. Her hand lifted slightly, then hesitated in the space between us. "I'm scared," she said. "I know. But I don't want to lose whatever this is." "You won't," I said. Not a promise. Just the best truth I had. Her fingers finally touched my sleeve. Not my hand, just the fabric near my wrist. Light, almost unsure. But she didn't pull away. And I didn't either. We stood there in her quiet kitchen, nothing dramatic happening, nothing breaking or exploding, just two people finally telling the truth without raising their voices. She let out a shaky breath. "Okay," she whispered. And I nodded, letting the moment settle between us. "Okay." By the time winter softened into the first hints of spring, their lives had settled into a rhythm that neither of them had planned, but both had quietly chosen. They still met on that same bench, the one that had first held their awkward silences and careful glances. Now, though, the silences were comfortable. Sometimes she brought her jasmine tea, sometimes she forgot, and he pretended he didn't notice, handing her his thermos so she could warm her hands around it. He still took his coffee black, still drank it too quickly, still winced at the bitterness every single time. "Why do you drink it if you hate it?" she had asked once. He'd shrugged. "Habit, I guess." But now, sitting beside her at 8:47 a.m., he let the steam rise a little longer. He waited. He didn't rush anything anymore. Life hadn't magically become perfect. Some days she still pulled into herself, quiet and unreachable. He still overthought small things, whether he'd said too little or too much, whether he should have stayed 5 minutes longer or left 5 minutes earlier. They still misunderstood each other sometimes, But the difference was this: now they stayed long enough to fix it. When the weather warmed, they started walking instead of sitting. She talked more, not dramatically, not suddenly, just gradually. Like sunlight pushed through half-closed blinds, warmer each week. He listened the way he always had, but now he spoke too, sharing things he never bothered to say out loud before. They learned each other's rhythms, not perfectly, but honestly. One evening, he showed up at her door with 2 mugs, one jasmine tea, one black coffee, and she smiled like she'd been waiting for him without meaning to. They didn't talk about what they were, or where it was going. They didn't need the declaration. The relationship had quietly grown around them, filling the spaces they used to guard so carefully. By summer, her mother asked casually, "Will he join us for dinner this weekend?" And instead of panicking, she just said, "Yeah, I think he will." His friends joked about how he wasn't around as much anymore. He only shrugged. "I'm busy," he'd say, but the truth was simpler. He didn't feel alone in the world the way he used to. Little routines formed without discussion. He texted her when he reached the bench. She watered his plants when he forgot. She started reading the books he liked. He added a little sugar to his coffee. "Just 1 spoon," he'd mutter, because she said it was okay to soften things sometimes. And when they finally sat again on that bench months later, the morning sun gentle and familiar, she leaned her head lightly on his shoulder as the clock hit 8:47 a.m. exactly. Either of them mentioned it. But they both noticed. Earned peace doesn't come loudly. It comes like this, slow, steady, choosing each other in 100 small ways. And he murmured something only she would understand. "We made it, quietly." She smiled. Quietly is enough. Did this story stay with you? What kind of quiet, real love stories do you want to hear next?